Great. Okay, we'll get on with the next talk, and it's me. My name is Maurice Gleeson. I am a volunteer with ISOG, and I've been a genetic genealogist for about 7 or 8 years now. And one of the things that I've been doing with genetic genealogy is researching my surname. I've got several surname projects. My surname is Gleeson. Gleeson DNA project is one of my projects. I've also got the Spearin project, the Farrell project, the Maloney project, the Malloy project, the O'Malley project, and a variety of other ones as well. So I think today what I'm going to talk about is how you can research your surname using YDNA. And there's two ways that you can do this. You can either do a YDNA test yourself and see what the results are, and there may be a surname project that you can join, or you can actually join a surname, start a surname project yourself and research your surname that way. So we're going to take a look at those two types of approach. There are a variety of benefits to either joining a surname project or starting your own. And these include, it can identify where your surname came from. So how many people here think their surname came from England? How many think it came from Scotland? How many think it came from Wales? How many people think it came from Ireland? How many people think it came from somewhere else? Okay, so that's one thing that a YDNA can actually help you with. It can actually help you identify where your surname originated. The other thing it can help you do is connect with cousins who share the same surname as yourself. So for me, I take my YDNA, it connects me with other Gleesons. And it can also help you break through brick walls in your own family tree. And for those of you who are just interested in general genealogy, this is one of the major benefits of YDNA. It can actually help you break through a brick wall in one particular part of your family. And I'll show you how that happened for me. It can also place you on the human evolutionary tree. Now, that obviously goes back thousands and thousands of years, and it might be interesting to you if you have an interest in human migration, but it also can have a very, very practical genealogical relevance, because it actually can place you not only on the family tree, but the family tree was in a certain place at that particular time, and it can give you a much better idea, not just where your surname originated, but where it traveled from to get where it originated from. So in other words, we all have various ancestral homelands. We know that our surnames probably arose around about somewhere to 800 to 1,000 years ago, maybe in Scotland, maybe in Wales, maybe in England, maybe in Ireland. But before that, of course, there was a mass migration of people out of Europe, because 12,000 years ago, what did we have in Scotland? A 1 kilometre pile of ice lying on top of the Scottish Highlands. And of course, nobody would have been living there at that point in time. So being placed on the human evolutionary tree allows you to go back even further in time until we all came out of Africa 50,000 years ago. Those of us that are not African today, all non-Africans came out of Africa 50,000 years ago. And then, of course, before that, we were in Africa for around about 200,000 years, going back to 250,000 years ago to the dawn of anatomically modern humans. So being placed on the human evolutionary tree tells you a huge amount about who you are as a human being and where you came from, and how your ancestors traveled since humans evolved. It can also help define the branching structure of your genetic family. So something that I'm doing with my Gleeson DNA project is I've identified the DNA markers that define the Gleeson surname in North Tipperary, but I'm also actually got a branching pattern of the entire surname's evolution, which ends with with ancestors emerging around about 1800 or so. So Irish genealogy goes back to about 1800, and before 1800, I'm actually using DNA markers to define the family tree of the Gleeson surname from North Tipperary. And that's something that you can do with your own family tree as well. So you can actually see where your surname split into different branches, when those branching points occurred, and where your surname moved to. It may have stayed in the same localized area, or it may have moved out to far distant reaches. So, for example, one particular branch of my Gleeson family tree that is quite old, going back to around about, I think it's around about 1500, 1400, that particular branch went to America, and there's no surviving members in Ireland as far as I can find, but the American branch has become quite strong. But it is a distant branch that just happened to survive. So that's another thing that you can learn from doing your YDNA surname study. It can also help determine the deeper clan origins of your family. So how many people think that their family name actually came from a clan, either a Scottish clan or an Irish clan? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. A few people, 5, yeah. And that is pretty exciting, because obviously the Scottish clans have ancient historical texts and ancient genealogies, as do the Irish. But a lot of the time, certainly in Ireland, these ancient genealogies were more political propaganda than historical fact. And the YDNA test can actually help you discern whether the historical texts were purely invented for historical and political reasons and propaganda, or whether they actually have a basis in truth. And of course, the fifth benefit of a surname study is that it helps you contribute to the growing body of DNA research and the advancement of genetic genealogy in general, which is why certainly everybody in ISOC are here today. So this is my family tree. Here's me down here. There's my parents, grandparents, and so on. I've determined the identity of about 50% of my great-great-great-grandparents, but I'm brick-walled around about 1800, and that's after exhausting the usual sources of family lore, the letters in the attic, the family Bible. In Ireland, we only had 2 censuses available, 1901 and 1911. We have Griffith's valuation, census substitute, which goes up to the present day, more or less. And we also have birth, marriage, and death records. We also have church records, which are pretty patchy before 1850, and around about 1800 they tend to disappear in most places. We also have collaboration online with Ancestry, MyHeritage, all of these companies that have websites, and that's really changed the way that we work with genealogy. We also have more and more newspapers being digitized. That's very good for Irish research pre-1850, because a lot of the more affluent families would advertise weddings and deaths in the newspapers. Glasnevin Cemetery in Dublin, very, very helpful. And we have the electoral rolls, of course, coming on now as well. So more and more information is coming online. But despite all that, there still is a big brick wall. And for some of you, it'll be 1800. For some of you, it'll be 1700. Some of you might be lucky enough to get back to the 1600s or the 1500s. But there will be a brick wall at some point in your family tree. And in my family tree, I broke through that brick wall with this ancestor here. This was a chap called Spirin, and unusual spelling of that name, which is why I kind of chose that as the one to examine first. But using DNA, I was able to get back from 1800 to the 1600s on that particular branch of the family. So it can be a very, very useful way for breaking through a brick wall. And the reason how it came about was that I went online and I found a guy with the name Spirin in his family tree, and I noticed he had an Edward Joseph Spirin. So I wrote to him and I said, oh, you've got an Edward Joseph Spirin in your tree. I've got an Edward Joseph Spirin in my tree. Do you think we're related? And he said, oh, yes, I'm going to tell my mother. I said, well, I'm going to tell my father. You know, and it turned out that we were third cousins. Our parents were second cousins. And my dad said, I remember her from a birthday party, 21st birthday party in 1949. Her sister went off into the corner, was kissing some guy. I said, I don't need to know your... No, you don't need to tell me that, Dad. But they arranged to meet up. So after 60 years, they arranged to meet up. And she arrived, and we were both waiting for her. And she said, so nice to see you after 60 years, at least. At last I can give you the treasure. And my dad and I looked at each other and said, what treasure? And she handed over 20 letters that my dad's mother had written in the 1920s that had been kept in their attic for the last 30 years. So that's another reason for doing this type of work, is that I can actually put you in touch with cousins who may have the family Bible or they may have the family letters. So 90 years after they were written, my dad got 20 letters from his mum. So it was a lovely story, and they kept in touch ever since then as well. But that was an example of one person who was on the internet that I wrote to. The other chap was a guy called Bob Spearing, and he was a train journey from New Jersey. And I said, do you know anything about the Spearing name? And he wrote me this 4-page email. He says, oh, I know exactly where you're from. I know these people that they go back to the 1700s. And he talked about these two wills of Matthew and Luke. And from that, he was able to build a family tree of these early Limerick Spearans. And apparently they married into the Hartwell family. And the Hartwells were mayors of Limerick back in the late 1600s. And they'd been granted lands there by Charles II for their fight against Cromwell. And there was a sliver of evidence that connected these early Limerick Spearans to a group of Spearings in London who were goldsmiths who were involved in the plantation of Ulster. And there's also a link to Cambridge, where a Nicholas Spearing was given a grant by Henry VIII to become the first printer of the Cambridge University Press. And his best friend was Erasmus, the famous European philosopher. So my dad heard this story. He says, well, there's no way you're related to these people. So it was a fantastic and a fantastical story. The question was it based on fact? Was there any truth in this? So we didn't know whether these Limerick Spearans were associated with my family, whether the Limerick Spearans were associated with the London Spearings, whether the London Spearings were associated with the Cambridge Spearings, and whether the Cambridge Spearings went all the way back to Flanders. There was a link with Flanders, Antwerp, Belgium. As it turns out, I am Belgian. So that was a shock, even more shocking than discovering I was Welsh. So these were some of the other Spearing researchers that I was introduced to by this email that I sent online to Bob. And the thing that I noticed was that they all had different spellings. There was a Spearin, a Spearan, a Spearin with two E's, a Spearin with an E and an A, a Spearing, and then my unusual Spearin spelling as well. Could they all possibly be related? We didn't know because they were all brick-walled at 1800. So this is a family tree, if you like, of the Spearans. And what we have here is the families of all the various researchers. This is the Ontario family here, brick-walled around about 1775. You can see the various lines of the family there. This is the New Jersey one. This is Bob's family here. Here's a Limerick one here, and this is one of the other families. And you can see that all of these people here in yellow did DNA testing. But the present-day families are brick-walled there. Then we have the early Limerick Spearans from those wills, and there's a 3 or 4 generation gap where we don't actually know who these ancestors were. And then between Limerick and London, we have loads of information on the London Spearings. There's huge amount of data available, all those baptism records from St. Andrew's Undershaft. I even have floor plans of their kitchen from 1500. Absolutely incredible, the amount of wealth of information. And then there's kind of silence between London and Limerick, and silence in Ireland up to about 1800. And then there's loads of information also about the Cambridge Spearings as well. But is there a link between these various groups? That's what we did not know. And that's where the DNA actually came in quite useful. We also were very, very lucky in that because the Spearans married into the Hartwell, their children were called Charles Hartwell Spearing, George Hartwell Spearing. The name Hartwell as a forename is as rare as hen's teeth. And coupled with the unusual spelling of my name, Spearin, it meant that that combination was passed down to various members of the family, and there are even Hartwell Spearans living in Canada today. That being the case, they can reliably jump back to those early Limerick Spearans mentioned in the wills, Matthew Spearin and Luke Spearin. So there is a connection here. See, there's Hartwell Spearin there, and there's Hartwell Spearans down there to this day. So we have a connection between the Spearans back in the 1600s and the Spearans living today in Canada. But none of the other families had that strange combination. Luke is also a name that appeared among the Spearans back in the 1600s, And Luke is a name that appears also in the Spearans in the 1800s onwards as well. So there's two examples of an unusual surname connection that ties us back to these early Limerick Spearans mentioned in the wills. And there's a few more Lukes in that family there. So we turned to DNA. What will it actually tell us? And doing a DNA test, very, very easy. You swab your cheek or spit in a test tube. That test tube goes off to the lab. In the lab, they look at your results. They put it through the Illumina chip analyzer, and they publish your results on your own web page with password protected. And not only that, they compare your results to everybody else in the database. And they publish a list of all of your matches' email addresses or some way to contact them on your web page. These people will have all consented to have their information shared. And that way you can contact your matches and see if you can actually get in touch with somebody who is related to you, and you can try and figure out where is the common ancestor. So that's the idea behind it. But Family Tree DNA also have created an infrastructure where we can actually do our own projects. So has anybody got a surname project on Family Tree DNA? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and another 6 here. So, you know, it is a great way of actually doing your own dedicated research. And at the moment, there are over 9,400 surname projects on Family Tree DNA. So there's a very good chance that your surname, or one of the surnames in your family tree, are actually already being researched at Family Tree DNA, and you can actually join that as well. When they analyze your DNA results, you will have scraped off a cheek cell, for example, and these little blue things here within the cell are called mitochondria. They've got mitochondrial DNA. That goes back along the mother side. In the nucleus of the cell, you have the 46 chromosomes arranged into 23 pairs. You get two copies of chromosome 1, 2 copies of chromosome 2. You get one copy comes from each of your parents. So chromosome 3, you've got a maternal copy and a paternal copy. Chromosome 4, 1 copy from your mother, 1 copy from your father. Go down to the last pair, which is pair number 23. These are the sex chromosomes. If you get 2 X chromosomes, you're a woman. If you get an X and a Y chromosome, you're a man. And that is basically all you really need to know about the technicalities of DNA. I will talk about really only YDNA in this presentation, but other presentations will talk about the other 2 types of DNA. And the YDNA, the Y chromosome, is passed from father to son all the way down. It never goes to the women. So it's a very, very good way of tracing back along the father line. What else goes back along the father line? The surname. In those societies where the surname is inherited. There are certain societies where you have a patronymic surname. A good example is Iceland. You have Eric Johnson, John Leifson, Leif Eriksson, that kind of thing. So the surname changes from generation to generation. Tibet has that type of patronymic surname system as well. But for most people in the UK and Ireland, we'll be using the inherited surname system. In Ireland, they were introduced around about 1,000 years ago and came into common usage 1 or 2 centuries later. In the UK, they were introduced roughly about 900 years ago, maybe came into common usage around about 1100. There are certain parts of Wales where inherited surnames were only introduced in the middle 1800s. So in that middle part of Wales, that part there, they didn't actually have inherited surnames until the 1850s. So it's interesting that you have that kind of dichotomy. That's the mitochondrial DNA, and that's the autosomal DNA. That's what it covers. Deep and recent ancestry on either side with the Y and the mitochondrial, and the autosomal goes back to all of your ancestors, but has a much more limited reach. We can go back 200,000 years on either side of our family tree, only to about 250, 300 years, though, with the autosomal DNA. So this is what a Y chromosome looks like. You've got the short arm here, the long arm here, and dotted along the length of the chromosome are the genes, which are coding for various things, this being the male chromosome, You can see that channel flipping is coded for here on the Y chromosome. The ability to remember and tell jokes, very important male characteristics. My favorite one, oh yes, the DC-10. The ability to identify aircraft, essential for survival. So that's an example of what a chromosome looks like. And all the chromosomes will look like that. Dotted along their length are these genes. But also dotted along their length are these various markers, DNA markers, which are ancestrally informative. Because all of us are 99.9% exactly the same genetically. And it's only that 0.1% that accounts for all the differences that you see in this room today. So that is what a Y chromosome looked like. That's what they all look like. If you were to unravel it, you'd see this double helix structure that Watson and Crick discovered up in Cambridge in the 1950s. And if you were to stretch it out, it would look like a ladder or a railway track. And these are the sleepers of the railway track, or the rungs of the ladder. And they're consisting of 4 bases, G, C, A, T. The curved ones always bind with each other. So a G always binds with C, and A always binds with T. These are the straight-edged ones. And because we know that this is always the way, there's a T binding with an A, T, A, there's a G with a C. We only need to actually describe genetic code as one line of letters, because the other line is the mirror image. So that's why when you see genetic code written as ACTGCTGAA, it's because the other side of the double helix is actually the mirror image of that. So that's just explaining what you actually see. But from this, there are 2 types of YDNA marker, and this is important for YDNA research because you can do both. The first type is the STR, and this is really a short tandem repeat. The key word here is repeat. So if you look at this, TAC, 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 TAC is obviously repeated 3 times. So when you get your result for this marker, it will be the number 3. So that's why when you get your DNA results from family tree DNA over there, it'll actually be a string of numbers. So that's what you're actually seeing. Those numbers refer to the number of repeats of those bases there. The other type of DNA marker is just a single nucleotide polymorphism called a SNP, and it's the substitution of 1 base. This might have been a G in the father, but there was a mutation, and an A crept in there instead. So that's all that it refers to, is that a letter has been switched, and it's a single letter. The STR is quite a few bases. There's 9 bases here, or 3 repeats of 3, but the SNP is just a single nucleotide substitution. Different types of STR marker tests are the 37 marker test, the 67, and the 111 marker test. So you can get different grades of testing. And the standard starting test for surname research will be the 37 marker STR test from family tree DNA. And there's also various SNP marker tests, and this is taken from the family tree DNA website. And you can either get a single SNP test, and that will cost you $39. You can get a SNP pack, which usually has about 100 to 140 SNP markers on the actual pack itself. And that there are certain situations when you would order a pack. And then the ultimate then is the big Y test, which is $575 currently. In the sale, it goes down to $425. It assesses approximately 25,000 known SNPs on your Y chromosome, and also an additional, it varies a lot, but maybe an additional 50 to 60,000 markers that are on your Y chromosome, but may not necessarily have been discovered as yet. So that will definitely place you very, very far downstream on the human evolutionary tree. So we'll take a look at what these tell us in due course. But these are the results from your YSTR37 test, the standard test. And like I say, it's just a string of numbers. And in and of itself, it doesn't really tell you anything. It might tell you roughly what haplogroup you belong to. And that is just a group of people who share a broadly similar genetic signature. So, for example, the haplogroup of people in Western Europe is R1b. Haplogroup over in China is usually haplogroup O. So it just tells you roughly where your ancestors might have come from. The real power of the YDNA test is when you compare your results to other people. And we did this in the Spearman project, and we tested 4 people initially. We tested Bob's line in New Jersey, and we tested 3 other people. All of them actually had ancestors who went back to Limerick. And then if you imagine here, these are your YDNA markers all here, and then these are the Y chromosomes stacked up. So if I broaden it out, this is what actually happened. Bob did his results first. Here is his string of numbers relating to these markers here. And then the other results came in. Now remember, these guys were Spearan, Spearing, Sperrin, variety of different surnames. The first one was an exact match apart from 1 mutation. The next Spearings were again exact matches, and then the third one had 1 mutation. And this was a shocking result because it meant that we were all closely genetically related. And the names here, Spearan, Sperring, Spearan. So that was the first surprise for me because I wasn't expecting this. The second lesson was that we should beware of surname spellings. Very, very misleading. Cruddas could be Carruthers. So you never know. And it's only by doing that DNA testing that you can see what variants are in fact related to a common ancestor back in time. The third lesson we learned was you're on the right track. Keep going. Because I was quite prepared to just stop at 1800 and say, yeah, thanks, Bob, for that fantastic story about the Wills and the Goldsmiths and Henry VIII and Erasmus. It's brilliant, but I'm not going to waste my time running after a red herring. But when I got the DNA results and it showed that we were all related to each other, I had to rethink my strategy. And it actually encouraged me to keep on going down that pathway of genealogical research. And that's the other big advantage that you get from this DNA testing. It can help you keep going with your research, even though you might think, oh, there's nothing down this route. The DNA might say otherwise. Keep going. We tested other people, and they all came back as almost exact matches. And another group of people, and you can see that some mutations are beginning to creep in down here. These people are more distantly related to the main bunch. But really, this was a very surprising result because everybody turned out to be closely related. But let's have a look at their most distant ancestors. Limerick, 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 Ireland, Limerick, 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 Limerick. And look where they're coming from. New Jersey, Dublin, Ontario, Philadelphia, New South Wales, Limerick, Ontario, 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 and Georgia. So it really is a good example of the Irish diaspora and the way that people have really spread out across the world. But the DNA brings them all back to Limerick, and as indeed does their most distant ancestor bring them all back to Limerick. So there is a consistency there. And the other thing that we can say is that any Spearing who can trace their ancestry back to Limerick is probably my cousin. So that's another thing that comes out of this research. It's with 95% probability, I'd imagine. So now, of course, I'm a Gleeson, so how did I actually get a Spearan? Well, this is the Spearan here. What I had to do was I actually had to go back up to my great-great-great-grandfather, and I had to trace down along a direct male line from that particular individual. And if there is a surname in your family tree that you are interested in, but it's not your surname, you'll have to do something like that. You'll have to find a male cousin who bears that surname, approach them and say, would you mind testing on my behalf? I'd be very much interested in finding out where our Spearan name came from, where our Cruddas name came from. As it turns out, my third cousin was introduced to me by my best friend, who was a lawyer who worked with him, proving that in Ireland everybody does know each other. So that's how I got my Spearan. And what does it do for our family tree, our conclusions so far? Well, first of all, the Hartwell Theorem links all the Ontario family with the Limerick family in the 1600s. But because we're all genetically related and share a common ancestor, the rest of us can actually piggyback onto the Ontario family and jump back in time to those early Limerick spirits. There are still 3 or 4 missing generations that we have to fill in, but now the DNA is focusing our research. So we're going back to the University of Limerick Library, as I did a few years ago, to look at primary sources. And because everything is digital these days, it was a pleasure to actually go back to a library, open that box of old documents and smell the parchment coming out. And I thought, just for the sake of treasuring this moment, I'm going to read the first document on top. And I moved back the tissue paper, and it was the transfer of the tithes from the Earl of Dunraven, from the local vicar to the Earl of Dunraven. And I read about the transfer of these tithes, beautiful handwriting on this parchment paper, and at the very end witnessed Matthew Spearin. So I actually found my relative, dated 1697, which is very unusual for Irish research. I found his name at the bottom of this first document as a witness to this transfer of the tithes. Can we link to the London Spearins, these goldsmiths in London whose kitchen plan I have? I'm sure they had IKEA at that stage. That's the question. So we actually need to find descendants of these London Spearings who stayed in England and test them to see if they match the Limerick Spearins. And similarly, can we link to the Cambridge Spearings? We need to find descendants of those Cambridge Spearings, test them, and see if there is a genetic connection. And then before that, can we actually go back to Flanders in the 1400s? And I've done surname distribution mapping. The name Spearin is all over the Netherlands. The name Spearin is all over Belgium to this day. So what I'm hoping for is that I will be able to get some of these Dutch or Belgian Spearins to test to see if there is a definite connection to the Limerick Spearins. And that will help support the documentary evidence we've gathered so far. So the next steps after this, and this is something that you should consider doing if you're particularly interested in researching your surname, is we developed a more intensive research strategy. We set up our own website where we started documenting what we had found. And this is very important because if you're going to wait until you've finished, you could be very old and you could have forgotten what you did 50 years before. So setting up a website and setting up a blog so that you can do it in nice, easy chunks is a very, very useful way of progressing with your surname research. The other thing we did was set up a Facebook group where people can actually share their genealogical information. So we've got people sharing photographs, old wills, the photographs of the Bible from the attic, and it really is beginning to get a little bit of a community going in the Spearin project, and it's connecting people with Ontario, with people in New South Wales. A very, very useful way of spreading the workload as well, because that's where you'll find other people who are interested in what you're interested in and will also help you research this surname. We also formalized the project on family tree DNA, and we now have 70 members in the Spearin project on family tree DNA. And we also established it as a one-name study with the Guild of One-Name Studies. So again, it's a multi-pronged approach to really researching your surname. If you want to find out if your surname is on Family Tree DNA, one of the 9,400 surname projects, just go to the search page and enter your name on the search function, or even simpler, just Google your surname and FTDNA, or Family Tree DNA, and that will tell you whether you actually have a surname already, a surname project for your surname. There's also some videos that I've done. You can find them on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel, DNA and Family Tree Research. And these are 2 videos. One of them is starting your own DNA project, and the other one is managing your project and interpreting the results as they come in. So if you do want to start your own DNA project, there's plenty of information in these videos. Each of them goes on for about an hour or so. So, benefits of a surname project. We've covered, kind of identify where your surname came from. It can help you connect with same surname cousins, which become your collaborators, can help you break through brick walls. Let's look at placing you on the human evolutionary tree, and also looking at the deeper clan origins of your surname project. These are the results that you get on Family Tree DNA when they come in. If you click on the matches page, you get a list of your matches. And I've got matches that have a genetic distance of 2, 3, 6, 7, 7, 7, a variety of surnames here. And that's fine. That's what you will get. But if you join a surname project, and there's over 9,400 of them, and over 600,000 YDNA records as of this month. But if you join a surname project, then this is the sort of thing that you will see. And your results will be in there in the middle of this. And this is from the Gleeson project. There's lineage 1, which is this group here. Lineage 2 is this group down here. The reason I show you this very busy slide is not so that you can read it, it's so that you can look at the colors. And if you look at the colors here, this pretty colored pattern here, and compare it to this pretty colored pattern here, you'll see that they're actually two very different patterns. And that's the take-home message. Your genetic signature and the genetic signature of these groups is different and can be expressed as the colored pattern. And the genetic signature of this group is very different from the genetic signature of this group. There's the occasional mutation standing on its own. There's another one over there. And sometimes there's a group of people with a similar mutation, but by and large, everybody has a line going down there, a line going down there, a line going down there. That's the genetic signature of that particular group. There's also a third group in the project, and again, you can see that the pattern there, the colored pattern, is very different from the other two. And that's what we're looking for when we stack those Y chromosomes on top of each other, when we compare the values for each of the markers. We're looking for a genetic pattern within the group that tells us you belong here or you belong there. Now, we can also tell that this particular group here, lineage 2, their origin is North Tipperary because the majority of the members in that group go back to North Tipperary. In lineage 3, the majority of the members of that group go back to West Clare. So if you did a DNA test and you matches this group, it would tell you that more than likely your ancestral origins were West Clare as well. This particular group, lineage 1, goes back to Suffolk in England. But not only that, it goes back to a named individual. The common ancestor for every single person in this group is Thomas Gleeson, born in 1609 in Cockfield. And that is quite an incredible thing because a lot of the people here, they're all New England, people who've lived in New England for a long, long time. A lot of them will be brick-walled at 1800, but they test positive for lineage 1. They actually jump all the way back to 1609. So it's another way that YDNA can really help your surname research. There's also another group, we're not sure where they came from. They have NPEs, non-paternity events. That means a DNA switch or a surname switch somewhere along the line. A young widow remarries. The children take on the name of the new husband. You won't marry my daughter unless you change your name, because I want the name to be carried forward. Adoption, illegitimacy, infidelity. There's a variety of different explanations for it. And then there's a group of ungrouped people for now. But DNA can help group people together. It can help identify a person's origin. It can even identify a person's ancestor. A brief word about NPEs. These represent a break-in transmission for a variety of different reasons. And you can call it bit. Some might say it was a bit on the side that actually caused the bit. There's a variety of ways that it can happen. Here's an example of a young widow remarrying. Okay, that was her first husband. That's their first husband's child. But when she remarries, she takes on her husband's name, the new husband, and that new husband's name travels down along the father line. But of course, it's not his DNA that is on that father line. And that's one of the ways that you can have the same surname but two different genetic signatures. Another example would be swearing allegiance to the lord of the clan or swearing allegiance to a nearby chief. And this apparently happened quite commonly in Ireland. I think the Gleesons, being a relatively minor tribe, would have been swearing allegiance to the O'Briens and the O'Carrolls and the McMahons. And so there must be the chief, the biggest chiefs in the area probably have a variety of different genetic signatures associated with the name today because so many people swore allegiance to them in the past. And this is an example of the interloper, the postman or the mailman, coming in, and while the cat was away, the mouse was at play, and the foreign DNA comes in, and this could be due to adoption or infidelity, and then that gets passed down through the along the direct male line. So those are a couple of different ways that you can actually have this break in transmission, and here are some of the reasons for it. We've mentioned those already. Taking the wife's name upon marriage is an interesting one. None of you will probably be familiar with Oliver Williams. You probably know him better as Oliver Cromwell, because he took the Williams name. He took the Cromwell name because it was a much more higher social status, and that was from his wife's side of the family. And illegitimacy we talked about as well. Anglicization as well. Certainly in Ireland, a lot of the Irish names were anglicized, and that's how the surname changed as well. So you might get Greens, Hooneys, Fahys, and Gleesons, all who have the same genetic signature, because it actually was the same name originally before it was anglicized to something else. So what are the chances that your surname does not actually go back to the originator of your surname in the 1100s or the 1200s? It's about 50%, okay? Which is pretty shocking, really. So I'm quite lucky that my Gleeson ancestry actually does go back to what looks to be the originator of the Gleeson surname, because a lot of people, it won't actually go back 50% of the time. And that's because the rate of these non-paternity events is about 1 to 2% per generation. If you're going to go back, say, 30 generations to the beginning of surnames, then you're looking at a 30 to 60% chance. Take an average, around about 50, so it's 50-50 that your surname doesn't go back to the originator, which raises the interesting question, you know, is it Gleeson by any other name still smelling as sweet? Does it matter that there isn't a genetic link to the originator of your surname? I would say no, because I think, you know, a Smith is a Smith is a Smith. A Carruthers is a Carruthers is a Carruthers. It really doesn't matter whether you have that genetic connection to the originator, because the originator of the surname, the following generation, there might have been an NPE. And everybody who descended thereafter is not actually genetically related to the person who originated the surname. So I think you don't have to be a genetic Gleeson to be a Gleeson. Turning briefly to SNPs, and I'm going to just show you what's possible after, because we've covered most of what I wanted to say about surname research, which is basically doing YDNA testing can really give you a huge number of benefits. But if you want to get into it even more, then you can do some SNP testing. And this is a map of the human evolutionary tree. And back in 2002, there were only 16 branches in the OR branch. You could add them there. You've got various branches here. OR is where Western Europe is largely sitting. But there was only 16 branches in 2002, 24 in 2005, then it went up to 71, then it went up to 290. Last year, there were more than 10,000 branches just on the OR part of the human evolutionary tree. And that's because we introduced these tests like the Big Y test, which looks at tens of thousands of DNA markers, and that really has caused what we call a SNP tsunami, a tsunami of new markers, and we're madly fiddling, trying to place them accurately on the tree. And in the next year or two, we're probably going to have the capability of having branches on the human evolutionary tree for every single family in the UK. So that is where the science is heading. Now, it may be, when I say a family, I mean the family going back to 1800. We might be able to get up to about 1800, maybe 1700, 1600. But that is the way that the human evolutionary tree is exploding at the moment. And we're getting finer and finer, finer branches. Now, that's quite helpful for us because we can use this for our YDNA surname research. There are several human evolutionary trees available online. Family Tree DNA have one. YFull is very useful for giving you the date of when various branches split from the rest of the tree. ISOG has the most definitive one and the most scientifically robust one. The others are largely experimental, but I tend to use the experimental ones more frequently because they tell you more. The big tree is for OR1b only. It's run by Alex Williamson. It has surnames and locations attached to the branches. So you come down the tree, and the last thing that's hanging on the tree is a list of surnames, a list of locations where they came from. Very, very useful for trying to get some inkling of where your particular surname may have come from. It helps you generate hypotheses, and then you can go back to the documentary evidence to explore that further. And there's a variety of different haplogroup projects where people are exploring specific sub-branches of the human evolutionary tree, run by volunteer administrators like myself, and testing with family tree DNA. In the future, the optimal tree will be a whole load of SNP markers with the dates when the branches occurred, associated with surnames and associated with locations. That will come. It hasn't arrived as yet. This is a map of human migration using the YDNA marker. It uses a top-down approach. It's coming from upstream, downstream, whereas what we're doing is we're starting with ourselves and building our family tree from way, way, way downstream and going back upstream. We're at the stage now where the two are beginning to meet in the middle. Our genealogical work is actually meeting the human migration work that's coming down from the human evolutionary tree. To the extent that there are now certain markers, for example, here in southwest Ireland, which are being associated with certain surnames. And then we can check these surnames against the ancient historical texts to see if it's propaganda or whether it's actually historically accurate. And that's where I am with my Gleeson project. These are the lineage 2 Gleesons, all from Tipperary, and we have a variety of DNA SNP markers here. And this is what it looks like on the big tree. And this is back in 2015. We had 3 Gleesons, 2 Gleesons here. They were grouped with a Carroll. But then over time, it changes. More Gleesons join. The tree gets bigger. It expands out so that by August of last year, we actually had this massive big tree that had Gleesons here. And this group here of DNA markers were specific to the Gleesons of North Tipperary. And we were able to put dates for the branching points of this tree. So you can see how your surname, you can see the evolution of your surname on this type of diagram. And I've done another type of diagram, which is this one here. And I've actually divided the Gleesons into 6 main branches. And they start, there are Carrolls and McMahons, those are our closest neighbors. They start about 14 to 22 generations ago. That's Webb and McDonough. No, 7 to 23 generations ago. So we're looking at a date of around about 1200 at this branching point here. And I've also defined the dates and for the various other branching points coming down to the modern day people. And this is called, well, it's really a descendancy tree, but you're actually using DNA markers in conjunction with ancestors as well. And this is something that you can do for your surname project too. Using DNA research, this was just using surname distribution maps, we tried to locate where the Gleesons originated. And if you look at the surname distribution maps, very heavy concentration there around North Tipperary, some along the coast as well, Cork and Waterford. And if you go back to Pender's census of 1659, mainly concentrated around the North Tipperary area. And you know, many of you who are doing your own surname research will use these surname distribution maps to get an idea of where your surname might have come from. So the Gleeson origin appears to be North Tipperary, and I'd expect from this just to have one main DNA signature. I'm not looking for a multi-origin surname, just based on these surname distribution maps, because it's all centered around here. So I'm looking for one DNA signature. But in actual fact, if you go back to the surname dictionaries and the historical texts, there are 3 separate locations where Gleesons are uncovered. One is in Cork, one is in Tipperary, and there's even Gleesons up in Ulster. But so how likely this is that this is a multi-origin surname? Very likely, because Gleeson comes from Glasheen in Gaelic, And glos is the Irish for grey or for green. Glasheen means little green, so I'm a little green man. The irony was not lost on me. I'm not sure whether it's a Martian or a leprechaun. So, with 3 separate origins for the Gleeson surname, I'm maybe looking for 3 different genetic signatures. But in actual fact, they've done some research on surnames and what DNA markers that are shared. And so, for example, if I just go back one, 13% of people with the surname O'Brien actually share the OR-L226 DNA signature, DNA marker. Only 6% of people with the surname Kennedy share the L226 marker. Only 4% of people with the surname Casey share the L226 DNA marker. But if we then turn it the other way around and look at the DNA marker and see what percent of people sharing that marker have the particular surname, 19% of people who are L226 have the O'Brien surname, 6% with the Kennedy, 50% of cases it's the surname and the marker. So 50% of cases are L226, 6% of Kennedys, 19% of O'Briens. O'Briens and Kennedys were big clans, so people swearing allegiance to them would bring in different DNA. The Caseys, I think, were a relatively small clan, so they remained fairly pure in their DNA signature through the ages. So it just gives you an idea of how forces that happened in the past can actually change the genetic signature of particular surnames. And I looked at the Gleesons and their neighbors, and I'll just flick through this very quickly. But there were a lot of McCarthys, a lot of Carrolls, McMahons there, McLaughlins, and when I looked at the map, here is the Gleeson territory around about here, and I don't know if the Gleesons are actually on that, because being a fairly small tribe, they may not be, but the closest matches were the O'Carrolls, the McMahons, and the McCarthys. I'm not seeing anything there that is actually consistent with the historical texts. So why the Gleesons are related to these people genetically is still a bit of a mystery. But this is the sort of analysis that you can do with your surname, is you can trace back not just to the origin of the surname, but even to immediately before the origin, when you would have been related to neighboring people. And by looking at the names of those neighboring people, you can also get a very good indication of where your surname may have originated. So that really is a quick summary of all the benefits of doing a surname DNA project. If you are interested in starting your search, do the YDNA 37 test with Family Tree DNA. Join the relevant surname project if there is one. If there isn't, start one yourself. Make sure you join the haplogroup project that is relevant for your particular DNA signature, and ask for advice from the project administrators there. They are a source of great help and support, and you'll get a lot of information from them. So thanks very, very much for your attention. Any questions, I'd be happy to ask them. There we go. I'll give you the microphone.
Can you explain what genetic distance means in the context of YDNA?
Sure. No, good question. What you saw on one of the slides, I was saying I've got a genetic distance of 2, 3. It's the number of steps away from an exact match. So if you were an exact match with somebody on 37 markers, the values for each of those 37 markers would be exactly the same, and the distance would be a big fat 0. So if you have an exact match, you will be a genetic distance of 0 from that particular person, and is expressed as 0 out of 37. A genetic distance of 2 means you're 2 steps away. So on one of the markers, maybe your match has a value of 17, and you have a value of 18, and there's another marker where you're 21 and he's 20. So there's a 2-step difference between your 2 genetic signatures. Question over here.
Can you just relate that to how many generations that 2 steps would be?
Oh, good question. Okay, so what does a 2-step genetic difference mean in terms of how many generations? It varies, and it's something like this. There's the bell-shaped curve, okay? I would guess that most people with a genetic distance of 2 out of 37, the average would be somewhere around about 200 years ago from the date of birth. So if you were born about 1950, and the other person was born about 1950, then 200 years from that, 1750. So genetic distance of 2 out of 37 could be around about 1750. But because you've got such a wide range around that estimate, it could be 1850, it could be 1650. 1650 is probably a bit too far back. But 2 out of 37, 250 to 200 years ago, so maybe 1750, 1800 would be approximately what I would think. But there's a huge amount of variation. To bring that variation in, to bring the estimate more accurate, you could upgrade to 67 markers or upgrade to 111 markers. So for example, if you're an exact match at 111 markers, you have a 50% chance that that match is your first cousin or closer. So that means first cousin, brother, father, grandfather, that type of thing. So at 111 markers, that's the most exact that you can get currently. But in the future, we're going to have 495 markers. We might even have 1,000 markers, and that will bring the arms of that normal distribution in even further. But at the end of the day, it is still an estimate. And the estimates that statisticians use are very annoying for us genealogists, because like we will want to say, when exactly was he born? Was it 1792 or 1793? And the statistician will say, I'm 99% confident with 95% certainty that he was born sometime in the last 300 to 900 years. So, question. Oh, did I cover it? Okay. Any other questions at all? Yeah?
Yeah, this genetic genealogy hobby is becoming a little expensive for me. I bought 5 big Y tests during the end of the year sale, but still I have all these male relatives in my family or my husband's family, including some of the son-in-law types, etc. I have 8 men at RM269, and so I'm faced with, do I buy a snip pack? Do I wait around? And then I have 7 more in my husband's family, RM269. I have this feeling that perhaps family tree DNA should improve the fine-tune that RM269 so that we have a bit more of a clue. Now, some groups, like the RU106 group, has published some guidance on if you have these characteristics, then you are predicted to be in this group, and you could do a SNP test, etc. But I'm really kind of in a quandary, and I just wonder, for a person like me, is there any kind of advice you can give so that I don't completely bust the family budget on this?
Sure.
I was thinking, people that have no matches, I have RM269 males with 0 matches. Leave those alone. But then for my husband, for example, who has 4 matches and we can't even figure out the common ancestor and 111 minus 1 or 2, maybe?
There's various things you can do, okay? RM269 is a marker that's very, very high up in the human evolutionary tree. It was about, 13,000 years ago, I think it was? 13,300 years ago. So you're really looking at, while Scotland still had the ice sheets. It's way, way, way back. What you can do is, well, first of all, ask your project administrator for advice. Hopefully the project administrator for your surname project will know something about it, or will know somebody who does, and will be able to refer you to that person. But it's just like I was saying to this lady here, join the ISOG Facebook group as well, and ask that question specifically. The other thing to do is to ask the administrator of the haplogroup project. So some of them are very busy, but if you get one of the smaller haplogroup projects, more downstream ones, they should be able to give you some specific advice. The other thing that you can do individually, as an individual, is look at your matches and see which ones of them have a terminal SNP. And then make a list of those terminal SNPs and go to the haplotree and find out where they sit on the ftDNA haplotree. And if they're all bunching in the same general area, you might be able to bypass the M269 SNP pack and just come further downstream and do a downstream SNP pack. So that would be another way that you can actually do it. It helps, it predicts, I would say, with 99% certainty what downstream subclade SNP pack you should test with. But you should do the analysis and then check with the project administrator or leave a message on one of the Facebook groups and get advice that way. Cool. Well, we have to stop it there, I'm afraid, because we're going on to the next speaker, but thanks very, very much for your attention.